Hello, this is Jed Brewer with Study Groups in the Below the Line Club. I'm really pleased to have you on our call today as we talk about an introduction to card processing and SNAP benefits. And really pleased to have Casey Cook, who's the founder and president of PIX, a credit card processing company, on the call today to talk with us a little bit about card processing 101. And so Casey's going to talk some about what happens when someone pays with a credit card at your store, understanding different processing fees and their impact, what's different about branded and unbranded card processing. As we all know, credit cards are one of the biggest expenses we have after labor, and maybe number 2 or 3 on your P&L as a retailer. So anything that we can do to move the needle on credit card processing fees, where do we have control, where don't we have control, can lead to significant savings for our companies at the bottom line. Now, we're also planning to have Joe Barna with goEBT to talk a little bit about EVP. I haven't been able to connect with Joe, so I'll try to reach him here while Casey is presenting. And hopefully we can get Joe to talk a little bit about EVT, which is a growing area of demand within our stores and how we can best serve those customers. So Casey, before I turn the floor over to you, just to give members a little bit more of a feel about PIX and your company. But PIX is a payment technology company. They specialize in wholesale, retail, multi-site, and online processing in the petroleum industry. Casey and his company are based in Alpharetta, Georgia, which is nearby Atlanta, and they process for hundreds of locations nationwide. Work with mom and pop C-stores all the way up to large jobbers and wholesalers like us on the call, and even bigger companies. And really pleased to have them in our Below the Line Club, and they have deep roots with many of the members that are on this call today. So with that brief introduction, Casey, share with us a little bit about Card Processing 101. We look forward to hearing more about it, and I just encourage the members, if you have questions, please type into the dialog box, and I'll relay those questions to Casey because we want this to be as educational as possible. So take it away, Casey.
Jed, thank you for the introduction. Hope everybody can hear me okay. Jed, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Great, awesome. Well, being from the Atlanta area, I have to give a shout out to Go Dogs, national champs. If you actually knew how much that pains me to say that, I'm a Georgia Tech fan. So it's pretty painful to say that, but I'll start here. If you watch the game, if you know anything about college football, you know about Stetson Bennett and the story there. I'd say PIX is a lot like Stetson Bennett. We may be a walk-on. Credit card processing may be a topic for some that, might be fumbling down the field, but we're also going to throw some dimes today and equip the club with some winning strategies. So with that being said, we'll move forward. Oh, and we won't be hung over tomorrow on the Good Morning America show. So I hope we're clear on that, like Stetson Bennett was. Well, first up, enough with that. We're a payment technology company with an emphasis on custom software. So like any good tech company, we're going to overcomplicate things today while we just try to make them more simple. So you'll see on the bottom left as we progress through the knowledge download progress bar. So likely we'll get stuck on 99% downloaded for half an hour, but hey, it's technology, it's software, we're going to move forward. So
isn't that the truth with that 99%? Yeah. All
right. Okay, so some assumptions we're going into today. One, we're going to be looking at card processing from the lens of being a C-store with pay at the pump. So we'll zoom way into there and kind of camp there today. The card types, we're under the assumption that the basic card types, we're all going to have an understanding of the basic definitions: a credit card, a debit card, a fleet card. As far as branded versus unbranded, that's fuel marketer lingo for branded, meaning an Exxon, Shell, et cetera. We're going to dive into some of that. Unbranded, meaning a private label C store. So those are some loose definitions. And as a disclaimer, this is educational today, not intended for financial advice. So with that being said, in coming up with questions and target goals that we wanted to accomplish today, we polled our friends and customers and got some good feedback on the common concerns in the industry. So, insightful, thought-provoking responses here from our customer base. Everyone gets super excited about credit card companies taking 3% of your revenue just to make it easy for patrons to pay. And I realize that in your excitement, often you may get lost in what you're trying to say. So maybe if you give me the liberty of helping translate our goal for today, which is rather than why are my fees so high, why don't we just help explain the fees? Let's understand interchange a little bit. Rather than what is this fee and why am I being charged it, what I realize you're trying to say really is, hey, help me lower my fees. So let's analyze some processing fees today. And then, the conversations about what does this change and how is it going to make my fees go up? Why don't we dive into a little bit about the world of branded versus unbranded processing? So let's talk about the impact of change there. So with that, let's get to ground zero with those goals being in mind. What happens when a customer pulls up to your pump? So big picture here, what's obvious is there's a lot of hands in the pot when it comes to touching a transaction from the moment someone puts the card in the gas pump to approving the transaction. And all of this happens in an instant. What you need to know here is that every one of these stops, there's a couple things. One, there's a cost at each stop. Two, there's a job that each one has. And three, which is, I'm sure, the Below the Line Club members' favorite aspect, everybody along the way wants to get a piece of the pie. So that's a fun thing that you guys get to deal with there. So let's break this down a little bit. We're looking at a pump, an example of a GoBarco pump with an EMV chip reader. You put it in the system. The next stop along the way is the point of sale. Let's look at, for instance, a Verifone Commander with a managed network service provider. That's actually two different components. They all have their own service fees, their own compliance rules. And then you have the handoff to the acquirer and the processor. That's someone like Pix, so we'll dive more into those details later. Moving on along, you have the card network. So that's simply MasterCard or Visa. They're the ones who created the rules of this industry, the boundaries of this industry, and they went and grew with the individual banks, which is the last stop here. So with the banks being there, you're looking at Wells Fargo, Bank of America, the big companies that issue the credit cards that these patrons show up at your pump and choose to pump. So let's go a little bit deeper into this picture here. The big picture being, what are the roles that they each play? So if you really combine those steps into three, there's three stops. There's your hardware, software, so that's your pump and point of sale. There's the acquirer and processor, someone like us, and there's the network and the bank. So knowing this, they each have a compliance piece that they're responsible for. You want to pick a good partner there. There's an element of choice. Who do I go with? What's the right choice that we go along with there? And then the next piece is what's the fee impact of whichever choice I have, or what's the overall fee impact on the processing fees, and how does that relate to my pump or my point of sale? So you take a look at pumps and point of sales. You can read the compliance piece. If you own C-stores, operate C-stores, or supply C-stores, you know that manufacturer updates, security and software updates are constantly coming through. One of the things that I wanted to point out that I passed here is that as a whole, there are good guys and there are bad guys. And while we may joke that we're the bad guys here, these are all the good guys on the screen. The bad guys are your skimmers and fraudsters, and they'll really stop at nothing to innovate ways to steal. the good guys have a ton of responsibility in this. So that's why there's these frustrating, if not time-consuming compliance pieces that regularly have to be updated, hardware updates, things like that. The choice aspect of pump and point of sale really is not limited by technology. As you see, you go into different industries, restaurants, the mall, places like that, you see all sorts of innovation that's happening there. The limiting factor really in the petroleum industry is not so much the tech that's available, but really it's the availability of support. As you know, what's worse than not having choices when it comes to point of sale is the downtime and the time it takes for a third-party company, a technician, to get to your site and get you back online. The fee impact of your point of sale and pump is really boils down to a couple things. The method of payment is the primary thing. If you think, oh, well, I'm not worried about chip readers outside, or I'm not worried about upgrading point of sale pieces inside, one way or the other is going to impact you. So whether that credit card is inserted at the pump, whether it is inserted at the pin pad inside, whether your old Ruby doesn't work any longer and you have to hand key it in, there are different buckets of fees for each one of those. So though it's not a direct impact, the method of payment and the chargebacks that may or may not come with it will impact up to 10% of your total fee when it comes to credit card processing. The second stop in this is the acquirer and processor. They really, because they're responsible for the handoff between those two ends, they're responsible for end-to-end encryption and protection of the card data. When it comes to choice, really, if you're in the branded route, you know that your brand is going to require their proprietary network for gift cards and things like that. It should be no secret that it is a profit center for them, so they're not going to give up on that as well. In the unbranded world, you have the choice of your processor and fee structure, and we'll dive into that here in a little bit. The fee impact of your middle person, your acquirer and processor, is anywhere from 10 to 30% of your total fee. So as you can tell, we haven't even got to the lion's share of these credit card fees. And so the idea of choice and control and how much can I really impact my overall fees, as you can tell so far, is limited. So the third stop along the way is the network and the banks. Their compliance piece, they're regulated by the government, the PCI security standards, and the card networks regulate themselves. When it comes to choice there, as the fuel industry, with the exception of some very, very large fuel companies, and then other large corporations like Walmart or Costco, Amazon, you're not interacting with the card networks and the banks. But at some level, you have some limited choice if you're a large enough corporation. Those fees and rates are negotiated between the banks and the card network, and this makes anywhere from 70 to 90% of your fee here. So in looking at, okay, we've been talking about fees a little bit in the introduction of the credit card fees. A few more definitions for you is zooming into the card networks and the banks. The term you may or may not have heard of is interchange. And what that really boils down to is that every credit card created, whether from your local bank to these big network rewards cards you see on TV, comes with a fee to process. Collectively and simply, we call this fee interchange fee. The fees that are generated by a credit card transaction, the fees generated and the revenue generated is split between the card network and the bank primarily, and then a very small percentage of that goes to the owner of the card as rewards. If you're ever really struggling to fall asleep and you need some good bedtime material, I'd recommend looking up interchange fees online and scrolling through the dozens and dozens of pages of the different buckets of interchange that could be assigned to any given card based on how you swipe it and whatnot. But what I want you to see here is that there are primarily 7 factors that impact and determine the fee type you're going to receive as a bill as the merchant. So not talking about the owner of the card, but as a merchant, what type of fee is going to be assigned to this? The first one is the card network. The most obvious one, well, whether you're Visa or MasterCard, American Express or Discover, one of those types of card, or a fleet card or a debit card, that's going to make up a majority of the type of fee you're going to be assigned. Whether that transaction was card present versus not present. The simple thing you need to know there is card present fees are lower than card not present fees, and that's oftentimes why you see in e-commerce the fees are higher for online transactions than they are card present. Credit versus debit, we'll dive more into that here in a little bit, is another piece. The merchant code category is another one of those fees. Now, that's just fancy speak for what type of business does the bank identify you as: retail, petroleum, coffee shop, restaurant, etc. Commercial versus consumer cards. You know, you may have in your wallet right now your bank issued credit card and then your company issued credit card. Oftentimes, commercial credit cards have a lot higher fees. Local versus international. If you operate on an interstate pathway and you're close to an airport and you're attracting people who are traveling internationally, you likely have international cards showing up at your store to process. You won't necessarily see that because it'll still be branded Visa, MasterCard, something like that. The last major category you see in interchange are the rewards cards. So that's a high level look at what interchange is. Again, we're just still trying to put a framework around what some of these terms are and how some of the baseline of these credit card fees is made up. So diving more
Casey, in general, you can't determine what your bucket is. That's determined by somebody else. Is that correct, or is there ability to influence that?
Great question. You have zero ability to influence your bucket. Your MCC code is assigned by the processor. The screen that we're on here, they are responsible for collecting who the merchant is, the rules and the laws around know your customer, KYC. They're responsible for identifying the legitimacy of the business, and then they are responsible for picking the right MCC code, but you have zero influence over that. And if a processor assigns the wrong merchant code category, let's say quote unquote to lower fees, if they get busted for that, there's major fines for that, and it's illegal. So does that answer your question, Jed?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, so back to the processor. Again, the processor, they connect the worlds of the point of sales and the banks. They're responsible for setting up the merchant codes, passing on the sale, and settling the transaction. They eat all the fees as well that have to be passed on to the banks and the card networks. So they have to have a way that they're going to recoup their cost. They're in the petroleum world. That's all we're going to focus on today. There are 2 primary ways of fee structures. The first fee structure is pass-through. Another way you've probably heard this is interchange plus. The concept of this is the processor is going to pass, if a consumer credit card shows up and it's a rewards card and it's used at the pump outside and it's an EMV transaction, there's a specific bucket for that. And the processor says, I'm going to pass through that bucket that fee came out of, and I'm going to add my fee on top of that. That's why they call it interchange plus. We're going to pass through that assigned cost for that transaction, and we're going to add our markup. An example of this is pass through plus 6 cents a transaction. So the benefit of the pass-through model is it's more transparent. The trade-off of that oftentimes is that it's a lot more data at the end of the month. It translates sometimes to pages and pages of the statement, and you can't see heads or tails for what am I actually paying here, or in any of these fees legitimate. The second type of fee that you'll see is the blended fee. The blended fee is simply trying to create a baseline fee that is consistent across the board. So an example of this would be a blended fee we're going to charge you is 2.5% plus 15 cents a transaction. In the petroleum world, you may have seen this if you're unbranded, but likely you've seen this model more if you're branded. The benefit of this is it's a whole lot easier to understand. If you know that every Visa card, regardless of how it is processed, is going to come through at this one rate, then you can account for that and you can build that in. The trade-off for this is in the picture of easier to understand, you're going to end up paying more for certain card types. And as you can see here, purple represents the true cost of the transaction. White represents what the processor chose to charge to accomplish their end goal, whether it's a pass-through plus or whether it's a blended rate. So I spent several minutes there just going over what these fees are. So let's be honest here, if you were watching a YouTube video, this would be the part that you'd skip to. So I want to be good with our time. Jed, am I good with our time so far?
Yeah, I think this is the question that people want to know. What can
Okay.
I do? All right, thanks
Good.
for telling me, but yeah, what can I do?
Good. Well, we spent so much time looking at the terminology around the framework of this. Let's dive into what actual impact can I create on this? So the big question I pose to you is, what as a group do you think is the most impactful thing you can do to lower your fees? Give you a second to think on that. Well, the answer is simply put, your average ticket. You can spend days and weeks and months searching for the right processor to negotiate this fee or this penny or this percentage or whatever the case is. But if you spend the same amount of energy focused in on average ticket, that would have the most benefit, the clearest benefit, and you have the ultimate control over that. So let me break down this slide for you. It's broken into a table of the 5 most common interchange fees at a C-store. Then the next section you see is the different sale amounts, $1, $5, $10, $20, and $50. And the last column you see in each section is the effective rate. That is credit card fancy speak for your fees divided by the sale amount. The big picture, if you get nothing else from it, as your sale amount goes up, the percentage of the total fee in most cases is going to be much, much smaller. The example that let's detail this today. I'll go through the 5 just explaining what they are. The first 2 are Visa or MasterCard regulated debit. The second one is a Visa pump. So an automated fuel dispenser is what they call it. A Visa small ticket would be the equivalent of an inside sale at your typical gas station. The next 2 are the MasterCard versions of the Visa. So you can look at all your different card types and all your different fees. These 5 fees are going to make up more than half of all your transactions. In most cases, it's going to make up 75% of your transactions. So that's why we're only focused in on these couple. That first line is a regulated debit card. Most of you probably know this at this point, but the debit card fee is a regulated fee. The reason it is the fee that it is was a law that was passed in the Durbin Amendment. If you've been in the industry a long time, you're very familiar with this, named after Senator Richard Durbin. What that essentially did is said, hey, let's put a framework around debit cards because most people are going to have them. Let's make sure it's not going to go above a certain amount. The thing to keep here is it has one of the lowest percentage fees and one of the highest per transaction fees. And as you get above $20, $30, $40, $50, that fee becomes well under 1%. And I know most of you looking at your C-store credit card statements at the end of the month, you're not under 1%. So There's some reasons for that. But this is also why you see large shopping clubs like Costco, why they only accept debit. It's because it becomes such a fractional fee when you're going to a store and spending that much. But if you had a 2% flat fee, that they're sacrificing a lot more at that point. So you guys can see this. You can ask more about it later on. I wanted you to get the big picture that average ticket matters most. I imagine the pushback I'd be getting right now is, okay, how do I hold somebody hostage and say, no, you're going to spend more money at my store? There are a lot more ways than you think to impact your average ticket. So what I want to set the table here is let's look at a case study, a tale of two C-stores, if you will, very similar in gross sales. So top line number, you're going to see, okay, these stores are very similar. The first store, your transactions are 10,000 a month. That would mean there's 10,000 transactions, 10,000 patrons potentially coming to your store, and they're spending an average of $10 at your store. The second store, same top line number, 2,500 transactions a month, but their average ticket is $40 a month. You guys are all smart. You can tell what's going on here, but there are two different strategies from the mindset of the operator of the store. You have one position as lowest prices. I already eat too many fees. I'm not going to run a promotion just to have the same guys come and buy the same stuff, and I'm not going to cut into my own margins. This is also typically the type of store you see where the layout is determined by the vendors. And I realize you don't have complete control over that in most cases, but you do have the ability to run your own promotions, set up the store, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second. But the second store's position is premium choices. These are often your well-lit stores, people who have their parking lots pressure washed multiple times a year. They have less patrons often who spend more. They focus in on the layout, really primarily to focus on impulse purchases. People are coming in to buy one thing, they walk out of there with two other things they didn't plan on buying. Masters of this are some of the largest retailers in this space. You can walk into any one of these big retailers that you'd recognize in any quadrant of the United States, and you'd see they're constantly tinkering with moving gondolas around, with changing up the layout of their store, and it's really all centered around throwing off the person who's coming in to make them look at a section they weren't used to looking at. Costco is also a great example of this, how they are constantly reshifting the store to get your eyes on new things. The other piece is the emphasis on promotions. Buy two, get the third free. And what I want you to hear here is promotions are not about discounting your goods. They're really about getting your patrons to spend more in the name of extra value. So you say, okay, at the end of the day, what does that mean for me? Well, you see it here. If you're averaging $10 a ticket based on how interchange rules are, you're going to be paying on average $16,000 a year extra to get the same top line number. That is a effective rate difference of 1.35%. And I know in a lot of other areas that you're focused in on, like float, things like that, that you would kill to have that extra 1% back. So that is a very simple, practical way that you can impact your overall effective rate, which has a much larger impact than spending the extra time arguing over a penny or so with your processor. Okay, the last step in this, and I really do mean 99% done. You've made it this far. Thank you. Branded versus unbranded. We could debate till we're blue in the face over the dealer model and arguing with them about whether to go branded or not branded. As you know, that in some cases, you might be arguing the roundness of the earth with a flat earther. Most of them have already made up their mind. They know what they want to do, and it's hard to sway them. And as we all know, the earth is flat. So we're not going to spend too much emphasis on that. What I do want to lean in here is wholesalers and multi-site operators. The reason I want to do this is, by and large, historically, one of the key factors in going branded was that the brand eliminates choice in a good way. They give you the goodies in a box. They handle the promotional material, the canopy, price sign, and more, all at the expense of paying a little bit more for each one of them. If you're considering debranding or unbranding as a multi-site operator, you're one of the biggest pieces you've always had to deal with is the wild west of unbranded processing. Well, for a lot of processors, including us, those days are over. We can do the same things that brands can do. So consolidated settlement, accounting software integrations, and then funding directions for retailers, bank, consolidation for multi-site or offset. In the case of the dealer model, one of the important things to consider, there's some organizations like us that say, if you're serving dealers, you don't want them to be unbranded because you have very little control over what they're doing. Well, we've seen that, others have seen that, and say, hey, you take on all the risk, and a lot of times not very much of the reward. We're happy to share some of the revenue because of how much burden you take on. So you guys did it. That's the big picture. I hope that you got a little bit more in understanding the fees, analyzing each one of these fees, and branded versus unbranded. There's a lot more to unpack in other industries, which we could do at a later time. But Jed, thank you for your time, and that's me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate that quick 101. And Joe Barna, I'm going to flip controls over to you. It should be a pop-up box so you can accept on your screen, so we can see your screen. But Joe, nice to have you here today, joining us to talk a little bit about EVP and SNAP benefits, talking some about what is SNAP, SNAP at a glance. We got all these acronyms, maybe even explaining what SNAP means, and how communities benefit from it, and what are the benefits for retailers of accepting it, and what's the best way to go about growing your business by greater accepting SNAP and EBT. So with that, Joe, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm just pulling my screen up.
You can. Yeah, you sound great.
Perfect. Had a little trouble getting in earlier, but I was able to get in.
Yeah, and thank you, Casey, for talking about the 101. And if any members have questions, feel free to type those into the dialog box. I'll be able to relay them to Casey at the close of this here, and we can get anything answered. And of course, if Joe has things that come up, feel free to send us questions about Joe, and I'll relay them to Joe. So, Joe, I see your screen. Yeah, if you can flip it into full screen mode, then feel free to go forward or run it off this way.
Yeah, it's showing full screen on mine. Okay.
Yeah, kind of presenter mode, yeah.
Let me just go this way.
I think it's display settings up at the top.
Oh, yeah.
And then swap presenter view. There you go. Looking
Okay.
good now.
We're good now? Good. Well, I wanted to thank Jed and the rest of the crew at the Below the Line Club for inviting us to this webinar and letting us speak a little bit about SNAP and what it means to the C-store community and the small grocer as well. So what I'll be talking about today is the benefits of SNAP for your store and for the community. A lot of people just focus so much on SNAP for their store, but don't really understand the benefit it brings to the community and how people can rally around, and the C-store or the local bodega can actually become the hangout spot, or the spot where everybody goes to, how they did with Cheers. Everybody went in and everybody knows your name. So, we see a lot of those types of activities happening around the corner grocery store, C-store, or the bodegas, where SNAP is becoming an important part of their business offering. So what we're going to cover on the slideshow today is SNAP at a glance. Some of the SNAP stocking requirements. There are certain things that you have to have available in your store to be eligible and stay into the SNAP program. How the communities benefit from SNAP, and the benefits of SNAP for retailers. And I said we can take some Q&A at the end of the webinar if we have time, or if anybody wants to, I guess, maybe send something in chat, I can certainly try to answer any questions there. So what is SNAP or EBT? So SNAP is a supplemental nutrition assistance program that is the most important anti-hunger program in the nation. SNAP actually started in 1939 as a food stamp program serving around 20 million people over the course of 4 years, although it was not a nationwide program back then. It ended in 1943, but it started back up again in 1961, and it only became a nationwide program in 1974. As you can see, at the end of 2020, 41 million people nationwide are participating in the SNAP program, which is a large amount. It's almost 1 in 9 people are on SNAP at this point. $78 billion in redemptions, which represents a 40% increase from 2019 to 2020, which is a lot of money coming in, primarily due to the COVID pandemic that we had, and I'll talk to that briefly here in a moment. Now, like Jed, you mentioned, there's a lot of acronyms that are thrown around. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. EBT is the government program that puts subsidies onto a card. As everybody probably remembers, the food stamp, the tickets or the paper food stamps that you'd have to use back in the day, and they brought food stamps a little bit more into the current time by putting it on a card. Some of the challenges with SNAP right now versus the debit and credit is the way the SNAP card is. So right now, all EBT is primarily done on a mag stripe card. So it's not EMV and it's not tap and go. So we're looking at ways to improve or bring the SNAP environment into the 21st century. But right now, the SNAP cards, as everybody has seen, is a mag stripe card. So as I mentioned, 41 million people are on SNAP. That's a lot. Does anybody know who the state with the largest number of SNAP recipients is? Well, I'll just let you guys know. That's California with 4.4 million. Texas is next with 3.4 million, and Florida is close behind with 3 million. So as you can see, SNAP drives a lot of business to some of these C-stores and bodegas in all the states, but primarily in the California, Texas, Florida states, because there's so many people have access to the cards to spend their money. In a SNAP program snapshot, in 2019, 66% of SNAP recipients are in families with children. 36% have families with elderly or disabled in their household, and 42 recipients have a family member who is working in their household. Now that may seem strange why people are not working and still getting food stamp cards, and there's kind of been a push in the food stamp FNS USDA environment to require people are working in order to receive food stamps. But we're still working through some of those nuances that a lot of people live in that environment where they grew up in food stamps, and it's just a perpetual lifestyle that they have. So some stats for the convenience stores nationwide. There were a total of 251,000 FNS authorized merchants by the end of 2020. And again, FNS stands for the Food and Nutrition Service, which is a division of the USDA, again, more acronyms, which manages and runs the food stamp program. So it is a government program that contracts out with states, and that's why it's on a closed loop card at this point. C-stores represent 44% of the total approved firms, but only 5% of the redeemed dollars. So of that $78 billion in annual food stamp purchases, only 3.8 billion are done at C-stores, as the average ticket of a C-store is anywhere from $7 to $14, versus the supermarkets or the superstores where the average ticket is much higher, it's in the $50 or $60. And the superstores and supermarkets actually make up 15% of the SNAP approved locations, but over 80% of the money, the redemption volume. So there's a big disparity in the supermarkets versus the C-stores and how much money is spent at those locations. And some technology or some investments have been done to try to level the playing field a little bit, because it's very difficult for the small C-store to compete with the Walgreens or the Walmart right down the road. So, and I'll talk briefly on the online EBT purchasing initiative that was rolled out a couple years ago that was really fast forwarded by COVID, which was trying to help the smaller store be able to compete with the larger big box stores that are out there. In 2020, 20,000 merchants requested approval to accept EBT, and a total of 1,757 were denied, primarily due to their lack of eligibility requirements. And we're going to talk about the eligibility requirements here in just a moment. So you wonder, why were these retailers denied access into the program, or why were they withdrawn from the program? In 2020, over 17,000 merchants were withdrawn from the FNS program. Some of the reasons that they get withdrawn from the program is they're not responding to the reauthorization process. Timing can vary, but retailers who are authorized into the food stamp program do need to reauthorize within, it's usually about 5 years. So sometimes a letter goes out or a phone call goes out that gets lost in the mail, or the phone call does not get taken and they do not get reauthorized in time and are withdrawn from the program. Some of them don't meet the SNAP eligibility requirements, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. Some of them are voluntarily withdrawn. As an example, the business is closed or sold, and if you sell your business, you can't just transfer over the EBT account to the new person buying the store. That person needs to reapply for the EBT program and go through the proper steps at FNS, which unfortunately due to COVID can take a little bit of time. And then there's about 18% of the SNAP or the merchants are withdrawn because they just don't have any SNAP activity, and FNS does not want to keep them in the program if they're not actually transacting EBT transactions. So we're going to talk just briefly about how has COVID-19 impacted EBT. So of course the number one impact was the increase in the SNAP benefits up to $78 billion. There was pandemic EBT, which is the free meals to children for the children who were getting meals at school, and when the schools were closed or they were remote working from home, they had no way to get food. So pandemic EBT money was put out into the system to enable the children to get food. They do allow some substitutions, which we'll talk about in a minute. And as I mentioned earlier, expanding access to the online purchasing, which has some challenges in itself, and I'll talk to that in just a moment. The public-private partnerships, as well as addressing supply challenges. So the online purchasing initiative was rolled out a couple of years ago and was supposed to take about a 2 to 3 year beta test. Walmart, Amazon, and a couple other locations, I believe in New York, were the beta test merchants, and it was going along very slow. And then when COVID hit, everything shut down, as everybody knows. So there was a push to get online ordering and purchasing for EBT sped through the system. So what would have normally taken 3 to 4 years probably took 12 months, 8 to 12 months to get the online purchasing up and running. Again, the online purchasing is a way to help the smaller locations be able to compete with the mom and pops. However, there are requirements for online purchasing that some of the smaller C-stores are not able to meet. So there are some challenges online purchasing, and there are some fintech companies that are looking at ways to address those challenges to bring the online purchasing capability down to the small mom and pop, so he's as much on a level playing field as he can be with the bigger box locations. So what are the retailer requirements for SNAP? So the staple foods, right? The basic foods that make up the significant portion of a person's diet. So to be eligible for food stamps, when you enroll through FNS, to become eligible, there's a site visit, and what you have to show is that you're maintaining 4 categories of the staple foods: veggies and fruits, dairy products, breads or cereal, meat, poultry, and fish. Some of the foods not included are prepared foods, such as coffee, pizza, ice cream, fruit cups, as well as heated foods, foods that are cooked before purchase, again, pizza a lot of times, as well as accessory foods. And accessory foods are snacks, desserts, sodas, and condiments like ketchup and those other areas, ketchup, mustard, salt, and those types of things. So there's 2 criteria categories required to be approved for SNAP acceptance. Criteria A, you have to have 3 stocking units of 3 different varieties for each staple food on a continuous basis. For vegetables or fruits, you have to, and I'll talk, the next slide has a little more detail. Vegetables or fruits, 3 of 3 items. Dairy products, 3 of 3. Bread, 3 of 3. Meat and poultry, 3 of 3. So to further break that down, criteria A could be 3 orange juices, 3 apple juices, 3 fresh bananas. That's 9 products in the vegetables or fruit category. In the dairy product, it could be 3 milk, 3 yogurt, or 3 formulas. Again, 9 products in the dairy category. So you see, you have to have 36 items in stock at your store to be considered eligible for FNS, or they'll give you probably some warnings, but then they'll look to remove you from the program if you're not up to the criteria A. As I mentioned, there are a couple different, there's another criteria as well. Criteria B, which most convenience stores do not fit into this model, is a store must have more than 50% of its total gross retail from staple foods. Specialty stores like butcher shops are often authorized under criteria B. So FNS does take some other eligibility considerations into account for getting authorized into the program. Of course, number 1 is the need for access, right? In a lot of places, the corner grocery or the corner C-store is really the only place people can get food. Food deserts. So in those scenarios, FNS can make an exception based on need for access or the need in the particular area for access to food. Restaurants. In some states that offer what is called the RMP, which is a Restaurant Meals Program, restaurants can apply for FNS to qualify for RMP, which would enable a restaurant to accept SNAP. Again, a lot of it is need for access, some extraordinary situations. Certainly with COVID, people who are homeless or people who are disabled, they don't have access to an oven or a kitchen, or are not able to cook food. So there has to be some consideration or account to how they're going to be able to get hot food. So in some cases, restaurants are able to get into the FNS program. But again, it's state driven. Not every state is going to allow restaurants to participate in the program. So if you're a restaurant, you need to get with your state to see if they are currently enrolled in the Restaurant Meals Program. And if they are, then you'll have to go through some requirements to qualify for FNS to enroll in the program, but you could potentially accept SNAP cards. And then co-location. When multiple firms operating at the same location meet certain elements, FNS will consider them a single firm when determining eligibility for SNAP authorization. So again, some other eligibility requirements are out there. So the question is this right for my store? You must be able to keep the variety of the depth of stock, right? The 3 of 3 varieties, which is at 36 items on a daily basis. Do you have the space to stock it? Do you have the inventory controls to manage it? Do you already offer similar items that qualify? And what we'll provide on the attachment here, what are the staple foods from USDA, where you can go online and actually find a little more detail about that. So what are some of the advantages of SNAP? Of course, reaching new customers for your store. As I mentioned earlier, the number of people who are now food stamp recipients due to COVID has grown tremendously, and it's going to be very difficult to take that back, both in the number of people on food stamps as well as the dollar amount being spent every year, $78 billion. And again, the increased sales of other items due to increased traffic from SNAP purchases. And then what we find is something very simple. that does make a difference is signage. We have several customers that will call us and say, hey, I'm just not seeing the SNAP volume coming through. Well, do people know that you accept SNAP? A lot of times, if they don't see the sticker on the door or on the window, they're going to go to the guy next door who says, you know, EBT accepted here. So signage is important to make sure that your patrons understand that you do accept SNAP. And then again, you are providing a service to your community by being a place where, as I mentioned earlier, people do congregate. They get together. It's, in some cases, that's the only place they can get together and talk and have social interactions. So, so those are some of the advantages of SNAP. Again, the community benefits of SNAP. 42 million people are suffering from food insecurity. SNAP helps participants avoid poverty, promotes long-term health and well-being. It allows the families to purchase adequate food, buy more groceries, have better nutrition, and produces improved health and educational outcomes. Some of the challenges, again, better nutrition. Some of the big box stores have ways to manage what is bought with a SNAP card, and some of the smaller C stores don't have that ability. So you have to really be aware of what is being purchased on your SNAP cards, because if you do continually sell items that are considered not eligible for SNAP, although it's not being recorded or reported, if FNS does a site visit, which they do from time to time, and see that cokes and smokes, as it's commonly referred to, are being sold at your location, it could put you in a little bit of jeopardy of getting a letter from FNS where you have to do some compliance to get back into the program. So some of the retailer benefits of SNAP, again, increased revenue, the increased traffic, somebody coming in using a SNAP card, maybe they're going to buy something else, maybe a Coke and Smoke with their regular money and not their SNAP card, hopefully. And then again, increased recognition, put the signage up, be that place where your community can come together and talk and buy their goods for.
Joe, to your last point there on increased recognition, you know, in addition to putting up EVT accepted here sign, have you seen leading retailers market, create awareness? What strategies are successful for people in growing this recognition?
Sure. So what can be done is, and what we have done successfully is helping our merchants market to their community. We're able to go in and say, okay, in this particular geographic area, let's say I live in East Cobb, Marietta, Georgia, 30066 zip code. I can go in through the technology and the data that we have and say, okay, in 3066, there are 15,000 SNAP recipients spending $3 million a month on EBT. How do you reach out to those members who are in your community to let them know you accept EBT? So we work with them to try to just further the awareness, because a lot of it just comes down to they don't know that they accept EBT. The cardholder doesn't know they accept EBT, and they see, as I mentioned, they see the EBT sticker on the guy next door, and once they go once, you know, it's a habit. Then they're going to go again, and so sometimes you have to just put it's something as simple as signage, right? I mean, people think, oh, it's signage. How much of a difference can that make? It does make a big difference.
That's interesting that you can get the data for a particular store, zip code or something like that to give you a sense of the market in your area.
Yeah, and I mean it's very beneficial for you know, the retailer who may be not accepting EBT to say, hey, I'm missing out on, you know, potentially $3 million of business being spent every month simply because I'm either not accepting EBT or I'm not advertising or putting signage up to let people know that I do accept EBT. So sometimes it's the little things, the simple things that can make a big difference. So where can you learn more? You know, we have put together a SNAP requirement quiz, a step-by-step guide to SNAP, as well as other EBT resources. If you go to this site right here, we put that together specific for the below the line members. So feel free at your leisure to reach out and you know, contact those sites. So again, just goEBT, our specialty is the EBT. And one thing I did want to mention is, unlike the debit and credit transactions, there is no interchange on an EBT card. There's usually a per transaction fee or a flat rate fee, depending on the number of transactions you're doing. But it is against the law to charge interchange on an EBT transaction. So some people are surprised to know that. So when you are looking at your merchant statement, just be aware on EBT, it should only be a per transaction fee or something that does not include interchange. So again,
that's interesting, particularly if you do a high volume of EBT transactions, as a way to lower interchange.
Yeah, like what we've done when we've gone to market at a flat rate, it makes sense for the guys that are doing 500, 1,000, 2,000 transactions. You just pay the same rate, so you don't have to worry about reconciling or worry about anything like that. So again, we just try to make things as easy as we can for C-stores because they have a lot of other things they need to worry about. And trying to make sense, as Casey mentioned, sometimes it can be difficult trying to understand the credit card statement. So anything that we can do to help make life a little bit easier for a C-store or a butcher or a bodega is what we try to do. And again, we're a family business, been in business for 30 years, and our focus is the C-store space, the small grocers, the gas stations. And we're currently processing for over 26,000 merchants nationwide. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions anybody has.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Joe. And one question that did come in, it was more, I think, for Casey, if you're still there, but somebody as it related to credit card processing fees just said, hey, what's considered a good processing fee is pass-through plus 3 cents plus 0.1% good. So pass-through plus 3 cents plus 0.1%. Maybe that makes sense to you on exactly what the member's saying, Casey.
Yeah, I'm here. Can everyone still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what generally speaking, what's a good rate to some may not be to another. But to answer the question very plainly, 3 cents and 10 basis points, 0.1%, is a good rate. But depending on if you are a more high transaction store with low average tickets, that would be a really good rate. But if you are, let's say, a bulk plant where you have 100 transactions, but you process several $100,000 a month, you wouldn't care how high the per transaction fee is. You would want that basis points fee to be very low. So it's a little bit relative, but I'd say by and large for a C store, 3 cents plus 10 basis points is a good rate.
Well, sounds good. Well, we're here at the top of the hour, so just want to say again, thank you to Casey and Joe. We are going to send out the slide decks to you so you can view them at your leisure, as well as the recording of this if you want to share with a colleague. I'll also get you the contact information for both Casey and Joe. I know if you have questions and would like to reach out to them, they would be more than happy to field those questions and help you improve and better run your businesses. So appreciate everybody's time. And again, thank you to Joe and to Casey. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.